everybody. I'm Amara Nash. I'm the Associate Director of Operations at CCA, and super happy to see all your lovely faces here and to be able to share poetry as one of the many great offerings that we do here at CCA. And I want to do a nod out to the Witter Binner Foundation for Poetry. They've actually funded our poetry program since January, and we hope well into the future. So we've been able to feature a number of poets on pre-show slides before films, and we're now transitioning to be able to do that before a lot of our virtual programming too, which is great. Now, instead of live readings, we're moving into virtual readings and recorded readings. So keep a lookout for those on our website and via our social media channels. I did want to mention one little housekeeping thing too, for those of you who might not have already noticed it, but if you want to unmute yourself, there is an unmute button in the lower left-hand corner of my screen. I don't know where it is on your screen. The Zoom toolbars seem to migrate depending on what kind of device you're using. But again, you can mute and unmute yourself both with that same little microphone button. And we're so honored and thrilled to have Elizabeth Jacobson here with us tonight to teach this workshop. She's the Poet Laureate of Santa Fe. She's the author of Not Into the Blossoms and Not Into the Air, which has gotten more awards and accolades than I can possibly list right now in the time that we have, but pure beauty. She's also the founding director of the Wingspan Poetry Project, which is a not-for-profit that conducts weekly poetry classes in battered family and homeless shelters all around the state. And they also have received funding from the wonderful Witter Binner Foundation for Poetry. Her work has appeared in publications such as the American Poetry Review, Orion Magazine, Plowshares, Plume, Poem a Day, and other places as well. She's had many residencies and other accolades, and she is the reviews editor for the online literary journal terrain.org. And she teaches workshops all around the state and in virtual reality like this. So thank you all for being here, and thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you so much, Amara, and thank you, Julia. So can everybody hear me okay? All right, so I wasn't going to admit this, but I think I better. This is the first time I've done a class like this online with more than, just working with one person. So I usually run my classes like conversations. And I like to give a little bit of a talk, but I am always open for people to interject, to have a question, make a comment. I want to hear from you guys more than I want to hear myself talk. So please, just wave, and then I guess you have to unmute yourself quickly, but I guess if you do that, then I'll just say, oh yes, Margaret, or something like that, and then Margaret can talk. We're gonna, I'll talk a little bit about eco-poetry, and then we'll look at one of the poems, and we'll probably have 3 opportunities to write tonight from writing prompts, about 10 minutes each time. And we'll also take about a 5-minute break in between, around 7 o'clock, so everybody can get up and for a few minutes. So what I'd like to do now is to just go around the cubicles and everybody can, I'll just call you by name, and then please just introduce yourselves and just briefly say maybe, your name and what you do, or what you love about poetry, or whatever you feel like, but just very briefly, just one sentence. And I think that's, yeah. So, Julia?
Hi, I'm Julia Martin, or is it the other Julia? Sorry.
No, it's you, sorry.
Okay. I'm a photo grad student at Arizona State University, and I've been wanting to incorporate poetry into my work, so that's why I'm here.
Oh, great, okay. Mary? Is Mary here? She said she might not be here. Okay, no Mary. Nancy? No Nancy?
I'm here.
Oh, here. Nancy. Okay. Oh, sorry.
Hi, that's okay.
Hi, Nancy.
Hi. I live here in Santa Fe, and I wrote poetry many, many, many years ago, and really haven't been doing it at all lately. And I love the idea of trying to get back to it with a kind of eco focus, which is where a lot of my heart is. So.
Oh, great. Thank you. Stephanie? You have to unmute yourself. Do you see it on the bottom left? It says mute.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
And actually, I run a group, so I should know better. I'm Stephanie. I'm here in Albuquerque. My background is in education, so a lot of my writing was related to education, but yeah, that's where the minor remits of money was, but the heart is in poetry.
Thank you. Belinda?
I'm Belinda Edwards, and I my first love was poetry, and I haven't been writing for a while. But I took the introduction to poetry at Santa Fe Community College with Sunil Lamdon, and I got all inspired again. And actually, Elizabeth, I did my poet project on you. So I read your book, Not Into the Blossoms, Not Into the Air, and selected some of my favorite poems. So I'm here because I like to work with.
Thank you so much. Diana?
Hi, I'm Deanna Rico, and
Deanna, sorry.
that's okay. And I live in Taos. I was an arts journalist for many years. I also was a documentary TV producer and writer in LA. The last 10 years since I moved to Taos, I've made my living as a book editor, including some poetry books. And poetry has come in and out of my life at different times, but since the lockdown, I've been like kind of obsessed with poetry, with reading poetry, and I've been writing poetry. And a lot of my practices are connected to the earth. So I really jumped on it when I saw this class being offered. So thank you.
Thank you. Gregory?
Well, people only call me Gregory when I'm in trouble, but hi, it's great to be here. I moved to Santa Fe a year ago and have been going to poetry open mics for the last year. I'm a book artist and am particularly interested in sort of combining my poetry with my book arts, which I have been doing. Last year, I published a book called The Hiker and the Blaze, which paired poems with some of my artwork. So I'm really psyched about this EcoPoetics workshop. Great to be here.
Thank you. Charlotte.
Hi, hey, it's good to see everybody. I edit El Palacio magazine for the Museums of New Mexico. That's what I do during the day. But the last workshop I took with Elizabeth, I would like to throw out there that I wrote 5 poems in 6 weeks. And then those poems helped me get into grad school, which I will be doing in precisely this format. I will be going to Zoom grad school for my MFA in poetry. So this is practice. So I'm really excited.
Thank you, Charlotte. Lisa?
I'm Lisa Seagard. This is a birthday gift from my son, Noah, who lives in Santa Fe. So I'm joining you guys from Wichita, Kansas.
Oh, wow.
And he knows I love writing, and I've been part of different writing groups off and on for years. So that's about it. I'm a proud mom. He's a Shakespeare actor there in Santa Fe. So if you saw Romeo and Juliet last year, he was Romeo. So that's my artist son hooking me up with a workshop.
Thank you. Margaret? You have to unmute on the.
Okay, did it work?
Yes.
It worked? Okay, Margaret Wood. I have been a speech pathologist. I've retired, and I just think poetry is intensely expressive, and it's at this time in my life, it's more direct. and shorter than essays and short stories. And it is exceedingly inspiring. And I think Elizabeth is a terrific teacher. So that's it.
Thank you. Julie? Julie already went. Wait, we have another. Oh, Julie. Sorry, we have two.
Hi.
Julie.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Oh, great. So I actually found out about this workshop via Julia, the woman who spoke earlier. I'm a visual artist. I'm coming in from Phoenix. And I just thought this sounded really interesting. I was actually teaching this art and ecology course, and Julia let me know that this was happening. And I'm a complete novice beginner here, so I'm excited.
Great, thank you. Elizabeth?
Sorry, I was pressing the wrong button. I'm Elizabeth. I live in Surprise, Arizona. And thanks to Julie and thanks to Julia, I'm here attending this workshop. I've been an avid poetry reader. I've attended for years and years AWP, and I've had the opportunity to listen to many poets speak, and I'm very excited to be part of this workshop.
Thank you. Sherry?
Hi. I'm actually more of a prose writer than poetry, but I love poetry and the way you have to be so careful about the words you choose. So that I'd like to get better at my poetry.
Wonderful, thank you. Jean? Is Jean not here? No? Okay. Ginger?
Hi, I'm Ginger Legato. Hi, Elizabeth.
Hi,
and I did Elizabeth's workshops last year and learned so much. I just wanted to continue. And yeah, I've been writing poetry forever and an eternal student, it seems. So here I am.
Thank you. Carol? Is Carol?
Hi, I'm here.
Oh, there you are. Hi.
Hi. I'm in Albuquerque. I'm writing a master's thesis on an eco-poet from Scotland.
Mm-hmm.
Her name is Kathleen Jamie. And I think that's why I got pushed a Facebook ad, because I saw EcoPoetics, you know, and I just, like Deanna said, it was, I jumped at it. It was like, oh, EcoPoetics. So I'm here to find out what people in our area, New Mexico, Arizona, Southwest, what is EcoPoetics? Is it the same here? Is it different from the studies I've been doing in Scotland? So I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you. Well, you'll have to tell us. Okay, and Sam?
Hey everybody. I am actually coming from New York, so it's a little bit later for me here, but I'm really excited to be here. And poetry has been kind of one of my favorite creative outlets, I think my whole life, but I really only started realizing that a couple of years ago. And I think one of the things that I like most about it is a lot of the connection to not just other people and yourself, but also to the earth. And that's kind of what particularly drew me to this.
Thank you. Rochelle? Is Rochelle? No Rochelle. Deborah?
Hi, everyone. I was really touched by poetry studying in college, and I've just always been trying to find ways to connect with it in the work that I do. So I was a documentary filmmaker for most of my life, and poetry really changed the way in which I approached the films that I made. And now in Santa Fe, I run a nonprofit that supports or promotes a positive experience of fatherhood. And we work with youth as well as dads. And for youth, we run a program called Identity in Ink, where we use poetry as a catalyst to invite students to think about their identity from a fresh perspective of family and father. So I'm always looking for ways to reconnect with this basic love.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you. Jan?
Hi, everybody. I'm Jan in Santa Fe. I, too, am not really a poet, but I do like taking a poem and expanding it into prose and then doing the opposite. But I read and write with Mary McGinnis, who many of you know, and anything I can do to get a leg up on that process is what I would love to do. So that's why I'm here tonight, to be a better poet. Thank you.
Thank you. Willa?
Hi, I'm Willa, and I'm, I guess, here to learn and get inspired. Seems like a great time to connect with writing. And I think the one thing that I've been enjoying the most during this time is nature. So, yeah.
Thank you. Dorian?
My name is,
Oh no, we can't hear you.
I'm from Santo Domingo. Hello?
Dorian, can you get closer to your device?
Hello?
I can't hear you so well.
Hello?
Hi, Dorian. Can you talk maybe a little louder? It's breaking up a little bit.
My name is Dorian Carice. I'm from Santo Domingo, Pueblo, New Mexico. I'm a student at Santo Indian School, and I'm just here to learn some new experiences with the EcoPoetics workshop.
Thank you. Lily?
The Navajo Nation, and I live in Albuquerque. I've always liked poetry. I've always been a really good writer, and I actually helped my dad write songs, and I've had a lot of my poetry published online.
Thank you. And Tyra?
Hi, my name is Tyra. I'm from Laguna Pueblo, and I go to Santa Fe Indian School, and this is my first time ever hearing about this. And basically, my teacher actually recommended this, so I'm just here to learn.
Thank you. Well, it's great to have all of you and to hear about what you do and where you are. And if we weren't doing this on Zoom, those of you who weren't in Santa Fe most likely wouldn't be able to attend. So, so that's pretty cool. And anybody that didn't introduce themselves? No? Okay, so we're just missing a few people. Mary, Jean, and Rochelle. No, they're not here. They didn't come on. Okay. Okay, so can everybody hear me all right? Great. So if something is you can't hear or what, just wave, or if you have a question, again, just wave, unmute yourself and wave, or wave and unmute yourself and just speak up. It's okay. I think it's fine to be interrupted in this kind of application. What I'd like to do first is to talk a little bit about eco-poetry or eco-poetics, ecological poetry, what it is it a term, is it a philosophy, is it a school of poetics? I think it's probably all of those things. And it's the prefix eco is from the Greek oikos, which means home. And so ecology is a science that focuses on the relationship of organisms to one another and their physical surroundings. So that is, in a sense, an environment, an ecology is a home. And also, ecology is a political movement. So we have these two things, the political movement that is in effect to protect our environment. So eco-poetics is a poetry of ecology, and also it can be a political poetry. It doesn't necessarily have to be, and sometimes that can kind of put people off. But it differs from nature poetry, and that's mostly what I'd like to talk about tonight. How does eco-poetry differ from nature poetry? And in a sense, and one thing I wanted to mention is that we usually say, I want to go out into nature or the natural world, but really we as humans are part of the natural world. So there is no separate natural world, but how else do we describe what isn't, that we kind of separate ourselves. And that's part of, I think, the reason for eco-poetics is to re-include the human in the experience of, the entire planet, the natural world. And also I like to kind of think of it, to use the term instead of the natural world, wilderness. So we have the human world and we have the wilderness. And so they can be one thing, the natural world, or, nature. So I think that the emphasis is drawing connections between human activity and the wilderness, specifically making poems that take a stand or that speak ethically or responsibly to what is happening in the wilderness, the greater natural world. So essentially, eco-poetics kind of rose out of when people became aware that we were polluting the world in a way that was really changing it. And I think 1962, with the publication of Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, was a key moment for the rise of eco-poetry. And so eco-poetry is not only environmental, but it's environmentalist. So it's eco-poetics, and we can go back over this, is a multidisciplinary approach that includes thinking and writing on poetics, science, and theory, as well as emphasizing innovative approaches common to conceptual poetry. Eco-poetics is not quite nature poetry, but it is a nature poem. It's like a nature poem on steroids. A general understanding of what eco-poetry is that it explores both in theme and form and content the connections between wild nature, human society, language, and thought. Eco-poems may also have a definite significance in terms of ethics and accountability, which I already mentioned that. So if this seems like a little too many definitions, we will be stopping this briefly, shortly. I just wanted to get this out, and then we can go back over all this stuff again. And by this, I mean, in a nutshell, an eco-poem is more than just an observation of nature. So it's more than just an observation of nature. An eco-poem is a nature poem with a fistful of human ethics and responsibility, which comments on and takes a stand against the human role in the destruction of the greater wild world. Okay, so essentially, that is what an eco-poem is. So it's different from a nature poem, but it is a nature poem commenting on human activity in nature. And most likely, usually, the disruption of nature. So with all that said, any questions, any comments? What do you guys think about that? Yeah, Lisa?
So pretty much, are you kind of giving us a tentative time reference of 1962 forward as far as relative place and time for the EcoPoetics, because after I read the poems that you gave us, you know, I was thinking about Walden and Gerard Manley Hopkins and Frost and different people like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess, and I didn't necessarily see like taking a stand against human destruction in the poem. So I was just, would you say that we're looking at more modern poetry to be classified as eco-poetics as opposed to some of the others in the past that use nature a lot and comment on nature and then make parallels to human nature or interactions with it? So those would not be classified as eco-poetics?
Well, that's a really good question, and I can say yes and no. So Frost, many of his poems you could categorize as eco poems. So we have the, you know, romantics, and we have nature poets, and we have eco poets, and they're all kind of mixed together, and it just depends on the poem. So I think that that's the best way to look at it, and that the romantics had a different stance. So, you know, they were transcendentalists. They were coming out of the Enlightenment, and I think that they weren't seeing the destruction of the natural world like we're seeing now. And so I think that so I have to say yes and no. So the whole thing with the defining of eco-poetics and saying when it actually came into being it's kind of, you know, tenuous. But I was just, for our purposes today, I was just thinking about 1962, and with that book, which really gave a lot of awareness to the, you know, to the United States of what was going on specifically in this country with the polluting of the environment. So let's move forward and see if we can answer some of these questions in looking at the poems that we have that I've selected for today. Any other questions or comments before we go on to James Wright's poem? Anybody? So, okay, thank you. Let's look at James Wright's poem, A Blessing. And if you guys have the poems that I sent to you printed out, that would be great. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to read A Blessing, and I wanted you to think about A Blessing as an example of a nature poem that's not an eco poem, an example of a nature poem that's not an eco poem, or is it? I mean, could we make a case for it and say it is an eco poem? So I'm going to read it out loud, and please follow along and mark on your document and any questions. And then we'll see what you guys have to say. So James Wright, American poet, born in 1927. He died early at 52. And he's one of the most well-known modern poets in the United States. He's a fabulous poet, and his book, A Branch Will Not Break, really switched this country into the modern form by breaking the traditional forms of rhyme and going into free verse. So this is from that book, A Blessing. Just off the highway to Rochester, Minnesota, twilight bounds softly forth on the grass, and the eyes of those two Indian ponies darken with kindness. They have come gladly out of the willows to welcome my friend and me. We step over the barbed wire into the pasture where they have been grazing all day alone. They ripple tensely. They can hardly contain their happiness that we have come. They bow shyly as wet swans. They love each other. There is no loneliness like theirs. At home, once more, they begin munching the young tufts of spring in the darkness. I would like to hold the slenderer one in my arms, for she has walked over to me and nuzzled my left hand. She is black and white. Her mane falls wild on her forehead, and the light breeze moves across me to caress her long ear that is delicate as the skin over a girl's wrist. Suddenly, I realize that if I stepped out of my body, I would break into blossom. So, what do you guys think about this poem? Is it a nature poem? Is it an eco poem? Is it a little bit of both? Nancy?
Well, I would definitely take this as an eco poem because first of the first line, the minute it mentions off the highway, not it evokes highway and what is not highway, and highway being an industrial human construction. And it immediately, by referencing that, I mean, it didn't have to do that, you know, but it did intentionally. So already it's creating a contrast to me. And the combination of that and also we step over the barbed wire into the pasture, to me kind of does a similar thing. The barbed wire has a lot of, you know, it's a human thing. It's something that often keeps humans out, or I mean, maybe it's supposed to keep animals in, but it also keeps humans out of pasture, of connecting with those animals. So I feel like the setting of it, it's kind of set against a backdrop that juxtaposes this beautiful experience with creations of humans that are not.
Yeah, excellent, thank you. And that the barbed wire, that's a really good point, that's a human constraint, right? And the highway too. And anybody else have any comments on Jan? And then Deanna?
I guess my comment is also in the form of a question. Does an eco poem posit transformation? Because clearly at the end of this poem, there is transformation, and it is a natural transformation into something of nature. So maybe you can just answer that question and say, agree or disagree. Thank you.
Oh, that's an excellent question, and hopefully a good poem would do that, whether it's an eco poem or a nature poem or a poem that has no category. So yeah, transformation is an important, I think, effect that we want to get in a poem, especially, you know, as a reader. One of the reasons why we would be interested in a poem. So very interesting question. Thank you. Deanna, am I saying your name right, Deanna?
Diana.
Diana, sorry.
Spanish, yeah, there you go. Just very quickly following up on what the first speaker said, there is this separation between the narrator and the animals. And I'm seeing it particularly in about 2/3 of the way down the line that ends alone, where they have been grazing all day alone. And a few lines further down, I love this line, there is no loneliness like theirs. So it's about that disconnection between the human beings and the horses and what it's doing to the animals, which I found interesting.
Excellent. And I was thinking that too, that is really the defining moment in terms of, you know, is this an eco poem or not? Because it is the reason why they have their loneliness is because they've been confined by human beings. So I love that. So thank you for mentioning that. Excellent. Anybody else? Carol?
This is a question as well. The use of personification of the animals, that Mr. Wright really gives them human feelings, and you know, he reads human things in their eyes. And is that something that is used by poets to help its eco-poetics?
I think that is when we experiencing that and personification in that way, it's called, I can never say this word, anthropomorphic. Yes. So it's doing that. I mean, that's what you're doing. So that's when you throw human qualities onto something that's not human. And so, but horses are very, you know, they're creaturely, and like a dog, they have, you know, we all have emotions, like, you know, humans, dogs, horses, mammals are similar in that way. So he could most likely sense what the horses were feeling between each other and feeling toward him. So I'm not sure, you know, that would just be a personal call, I think, in this poem. I'd like to just go on to Jane Hirschfield's really short poem to compare the two, so you can get a sense of this is clearly an eco poem. It's very short. It's called Global Warming. And Jane Hirschfield, another very, very well-known American poet, born in 1953. She has many interesting books. Global Warming. When his ship first came to Australia, Cook wrote, the natives continued fishing without looking up, unable, it seems, to fear what was too large to be comprehended. I'll read it one more time. When his ship first came to Australia, Cook wrote, the natives continued fishing without looking up, unable, it seems, to fear what was too large to be comprehended. So what do you guys think? So she's got some, you know, pretty heavy human themes here going on about denial and, you know, fear. And she's titled it Global Warming. So she's making a pretty clear statement that, you know, we have our heads in the ground. And this was in 2004. So what do you guys, looking at these two poems, does A Blessing then look more like a nature poem compared to Global Warming? Yes, Deborah.
Well, you know, what occurs to me is that going back to A Blessing, you know, the line, at home once more, at home, you know, eco.
Mm-hmm.
The horses began munching the young tufts of spring in the darkness. They're oblivious to the poet and his friend, the observers. And so are the natives. The natives are also at home in their world. They're fishing and they're unperturbed because they can't even begin to comprehend what's just happened with this arrival. And what I'm getting, and I think The Blessing is a kind of eco poem that's just very subtle and gracious, because he's expressing this longing to be at one.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to hold the slenderer one in my arms. And that longing to be part of that world that actually is how the poem concludes, when he says, suddenly I realized that if I stepped out of my body, I would break into blossom, which would be, it does suggest this experience of transcendent oneness. That's very different from the very, you know, abrupt tone of Jane Hirschfield's poem,
Mm-hmm.
where there's just a complete disconnection and non-comprehension.
Yeah, yeah, thank you. And I think in the Hirschfield poem, that theme of disconnection is reflected exactly, you know, in the structure and the crafting of that poem. And I love that you said, you know, A Blessing, it is an eco poem also, in that it's a home, and so is Hirschfield's. And it's like all poems, in a sense, you know, are eco poems, because they have their own ecology. Each poem has its own ecology, with its tone and style and voice and structure and form and its content and its language. So in a sense, in that way, all poems are eco-poems. And I offer you this definition to think about it one way, and then we're going to switch it, and we're going to try to get rid of the definition a little bit and see how that works as well. So anything else, any other comments about these poems together? And then we're going to move on to a writing prompt. Belinda, yes.
So I think both of the poems are poetic poems. And for the blessing, I think the entree is giving us a sense of how the natural world feels about the containment that it's in. So we have that feeling and an identification, at least I do, identification with the ponies and the understanding of the effect on them. And then for the global warming, what happens for me here is political. And it's a lot of things that are unsaid that comes to my mind. And it's all the images of it's all the images of colonialism, you know, how the land was changed, how the indigenous people were contained, almost like the ponies in some ways. So I think it's different ways of looking or entering into the eco-poetic.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you for saying all those things. And yeah, and I think that all those things are in that global warming, and all those things are the theme of the way humans look the other way, you know, and don't own up to what they're destroying. So, you know, and all what you said, the culture, the native culture, the land, and the colonialism. So thank you for mentioning that. And one other thing I wanted to say about the blessing is that, you know, I think it's such a warm poem because the speaker of the poem is so in love with the horses and so in love with this moment in his life that the total joy he expresses at the end of the poem is, you know, kind of a phenomenal surprise that we are ready for because he's built up this environment so well. So just looking at that poem in that structure with the clear narrative in a lyric poem, and then the kind of the surprise at the end, an abstract image that we totally get. I mean, I think because the joy is overwhelming, and as compared to the Hirschfield poem, where it just leaves you like, wow, so sad. I think just kind of so embarrassed for our you know, human capacity for destruction. So what I was thinking for you guys to do now, to take just maybe about 7 minutes, and we'll do longer writing as we get going, but a few sentences about a beloved creature, about a beloved spot in the wilderness that you return to often or that you want to return to. And say how these sentences and how they could be incorporated into an eco poem. So maybe think about these creatures or this place and something that you feel protective about them, or there's something going on with them that you would want to make a statement about it in terms of protecting them, or talking about their demise, or a habitat change perhaps because of global warming, climate destruction. So I'm going to time you guys. And is that clear? Anybody have any questions about that writing prompt exercise? So go ahead. Oh, yes, Tyra.
I clearly don't understand what you're talking about. Like, can you elaborate on that a little clearly?
For the prompt?
Yeah, because for when you're talking, sometimes it breaks up, so I don't really know what you're trying to say.
Oh, okay. So we're going to take about 5 to 7 minutes and spend that time writing about a creature that you love or a place that you love in the wilderness that you return to. And then think about that creature or that place and how it might be experiencing climate change and how you could develop a poem as an eco poem by making a kind of the speaker making a stance in the poem, explaining what's going on in that environment, in the wilderness or with that creature. Is that clear?
Is it supposed to be specific to climate change?
Well, I think when you pick your creature or your place, I think something will come into your mind. So don't worry about it. Just write, pick the creature, pick the place. Like James Wright has written about horses, and Jane Hirschfield has written about, when coming to an island, a pristine island that hadn't experienced any outsiders. So I was thinking, for me, I would pick a spot that I return to regularly on a hike, and how I notice things changing over the years because of perhaps dryness in our New Mexico climate.
Are we writing in the form of a poem, or is this just
just a free writing experience in your journals?
Okay.
Okay, so go ahead. I'm going to time you now for 5 minutes, okay? Just write and don't think about it too much. Enjoy. Just write a few sentences about a beloved creature or a beloved place in the wilderness. So I'd like to move on to the next poem, which is we're going to look at, and we're only going to get to a few of the poems I gave you tonight, unfortunately. Singularity by Marie Howe. A couple of things I wanted to say before we looked at Marie Howe's poems, that humans, we seem to thrive on definition. We're always explaining ourselves to both connect with each other and to distinguish why we do this. You know, it's very complex. Defining things can be fun and thought-provoking, but it's important not to get too attached to these definitions. So that's what I was saying earlier when we were defining eco-poetics. We also don't want to get too attached to it, that where we're thinking, oh, I have to write an eco poem, because you know that doesn't matter. So you know, if it happens, it happens, and if it doesn't, it doesn't. I love the ideology and the defining of poetics, and I also love unraveling these definitions. So while I think it's important and also fun to investigate the school of eco-poetics and what this term implies, I also think it's necessary, like I just said, not to be attached to these definitions in terms of trying to fit your poems into this category. So with that said, I'd like to look at a singularity. I'll just read this aloud. And it really speaks to what Deborah was talking about, what she experienced from a blessing, that becoming one, and you know that we are one. And this is a really, I think, interesting take on the idea of Stephen Hawking's singularity, which is, well, we can talk about that afterwards. And Marie Howe's a wonderful contemporary poet. She was born in 1950, and her style is very clear. So I'll read the poem and then we can talk about it. And I was just thinking if there's anything I want you to think about, but not really. Okay, singularity. Do you sometimes want to wake up to the singularity we once were? So compact, nobody needed a bed or food or money. Nobody hiding in the school bathroom or home alone, pulling open the drawer where the pills are kept. For every atom belonging to me as good belongs to you. Remember, there was no nature, no them, no test to determine if the elephant grieves her calf or if the coral reef feels pain. Trashed oceans don't speak English or Farsi or French. Would that we could wake up to what we were when we were ocean and before that, to when sky was earth and animal was energy and rock was liquid and stars were space and space was not at all, nothing. Before we came to believe humans were so important. Before this awful loneliness. Can molecules recall it? What once was before anything happened? No I, no we, no one, no was, no verb, no noun, only a tiny, tiny dot brimming with is, all everything home. So the idea behind singularity, I mean, just in a nutshell, is that everything was just, you know, a tiny, our entire multiverse was compressed into, like, you know, the point of a pin, and it became under so much pressure that created the Big Bang. And I mean, that's just in a very a nutshell. But we can speak more to that. So what do you guys think about this poem? There's also a line from Whitman included here: for every atom belonging to me as good belongs to you. Anybody have any comments? I think that the first line is really interesting. Do you sometimes want to wake up to the singularity? You know, it's like waking up, opening up the mind, and also waking up in the morning to the not the individual, but to all one thing. So I really like that beginning. Willa?
I was thinking kind of like that other poem about the horses breaking out of ourselves, just that the human form has come to represent this disconnection from nature. And I feel like this poem speaks to that. And yeah, that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Wonderful. Anybody else? I think I love the down toward the end, before we came to believe humans were so important. I think that kind of sums up a theory of eco-poetics in that one line, before we came to believe humans were so important, and how we dominate the world we live in. The language of this poem, as I said, is really clear, and one thought follows the next, so it's easy to understand. I really like that in poems. Yeah, Charlotte?
Yeah, related directly to the language, something that I really appreciate about this poem, I personally can very much get lost when really big issues are being discussed, and I think eco-poetics kind of lends itself to that. So like for example, the last like 8 lines of this poem are like if that was all this poem was, I'd be like, nope, not gonna read it, sorry. But there's a few places in here, like the lines like nobody hiding in the school bathroom, the drawer where the pills are kept, the elephant grieving her calf. There are these like really concrete things that you can kind of grab onto and stay grounded throughout such like a lofty approach, and I really appreciate that about her style.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And all those details, those images are ones most of us can relate to, that we've been there, we've done that, and we can visualize, each one as as the poem is building. And so when we get to the end and the abstract lines at the end, we just kind of go with it, and it becomes mysterious. So, I mean, looking at this poem, from its craft aspects, it's so well crafted. It's very tight, which is ironic, also in the theme of it. So it's really good that way. Anything else on this poem? And we'll go on to another one.
Yeah.
Yes, Lisa. Oh, and Deborah. Okay, Lisa, and then Deborah.
Yeah. So there's a longing to go back, and so as I thought about it, it's starting from contemporary times, but trying to come back to a point of innocence. So it's kind of an assumption of a fallen human condition.
Mm-hmm.
So it's come back to this point, and we're going to retreat, and it's almost return to existence like before creation, or being unmade.
Nice.
And so, and the second to last line, where above it says only a tiny dot brimming with is. It's just, that kind of sums up the idea of there's all this potential that can come forth, but it's wanting to retreat from a fallen state, all of the fallen stuff that seems that we can't get past.
Exactly. Thank you. Wonderful. Who else? Oh, Stephanie? Can you unmute yourself? There you go.
One thing that I appreciated about this poem and found really effective was that she puts it in your lap right away by saying, do you sometimes? And she talks about you, which sort of puts it in your face. And so you have to acknowledge that you're a part of all this that's going on. And there's no way you can avoid it. She keeps including you in this. And when she includes these, sort of pedestrian activities, such as was referred to before, it's like, yeah, I've pulled open a drawer, I've hidden in the school bathroom. Again, you can't avoid that. She really makes it specific to you, even though she doesn't know who you are or what you've done. And then to follow up on, I can't see the name, point, is that in both this poem as well as a blessing, they specifically use the word loneliness. And I think that's something that comes through a lot in EcoPoetics, is a feeling of separation and actual loneliness. But then she ties it back so that at the very end we've come home. So we've gone from something very specific and very concrete and a feeling that everyone can identify with, and brought it all the way down to something so tiny, but it's home.
Lovely. Thank you. Yes. Deborah?
Yeah, just to build on that a little bit, you know what I flashed on is the opening line of the Quran is, I was a hidden treasure and I longed to be known, and therefore I created the world. And it came to mind just thinking about these lines that, you know, we've noted that are just so stunning. Nobody needed a bed or food or money. Nobody hiding in the school bathroom or home alone, pulling open the door where the pills are kept. Just feeling this like heartrending, lonely sorrow of what's become of this creation. And that we've actually gone so far that now there's this longing to go back to that single point of undifferentiated, just oneness of being, where there is no individual human struggle or drama. It just really just hit me very, very hard.
Thank you for articulating that. That was beautiful. So I offered you guys a break, and we're already over. It's after 7. Does anybody need a break, or should we just continue? How about if you feel like you need a break, just go ahead and take a break, and we'll just go on. So the next poem I'd like to look at is Craig Santo Perez's poem, and the one, the Kingfisher, the Micronesian Kingfisher. And a couple of things I just wanted to say, that one of the things writing ecologically means is that the Poetics is at the junction of humanity and environmental justice. So environmental justice for creatures and for other humans as well, which I don't think we're going to get into because just for lack of time. When we were, I wanted to look at the poems of Marilyn Chin, Lucille Clifton, and Joy Harjo for those reasons. But I think you'll have to look at those yourselves or another time. But with Craig Santos Perez poem, you know, how does a poem, I'm asking this question answers, you know, how does a poem respond to an environmental human-induced crisis? Okay, so his poem, which excuse me if I don't pronounce this correctly, Ginen, the Micronesian Kingfisher, I Shihik, and so that I Sihik is a word in the Chamorro language, which is the native language of Guam and the Mariana Islands. And it is the name for that bird, the kingfisher, in that language. And he uses that, and he uses that, and I'm going to read the poem, but I just wanted to introduce it this way. Ironically, of course, because the bird is becoming extinct, as is the language. It has like, I think it has like 58,000 speakers now, the language. So Craig Santos Perez is a younger man. He's born in 1980, and he is known for his eco-poetry. And so here we have a poem about a threatened bird. And one of the things, we can talk about it afterwards. So I'll just read the poem. Ginen, the Micronesian Kingfisher, I Shihek. Our nightmare, no bird song. The jungle was riven, emptied of eye, shehek, bright green, turquoise, red, gold, bright blue, green, turquoise, red, gold, feathers everywhere, brown tree snakes, avian silence. The snakes entered without words. When we saw them, it was too late. They were not our doors sliding along the passages of shehek, empire. Then the zookeepers came, called it species survival plan, captured shehek, and transferred the last 29 Micronesian kingfishers to zoos for captive breeding, 1988. They repeated shehek and repeated, if it weren't for us, your birds, shehek, would be gone forever. What does not change? Last wild scene. So the story behind this poem is exactly what he's writing, that there were snakes that were introduced into the environment, which were not part of the indigenous environment. They were like either pets let loose, or somebody brought them, like Margaret mentioned earlier, goldfish released into a pond. And they killed almost all of the birds. And so the zookeepers came and rounded up, what did he say here, whatever the number is in the poem, and brought them to the zoos for captive breeding, and they were successful. So they were able to release them, and the birds grew back in their number. But anyway, it's the whole thing is process is interesting and absurd in a lot of ways. And what do you guys think? Charlotte.
I absolutely love this poem. I thought it was really cool. Well, cool seems like a weird word to use for a poem like this, but you know what I mean. And I really appreciated the lines, if it weren't for us, your birds would be gone forever. And there's just, not only is there just this very much divide of us and them in that, which is a little infuriating, but the birds are gone forever. They rounded them all up and took them away, and they don't exist in the way that they did, you know, naturally in the forests. And so yeah, there are some birds alive somewhere, but they're not the same birds.
Yeah, the irony in this poem, I think, is astounding, and the way it's structured. You know, it's so clear and transparent, but also, you know, just so well done that it becomes mysterious. And you know, to me, it's really fascinating. I'm glad you had that same experience with the poem, Charlotte. Anybody? Sam?
Yeah, I really liked the use of brackets around specific words. So most of the words were like our or we, and then the name of the bird and a year. So to me, it kind of almost suggested that you could replace any of those with a different year or a different species, and you'd have the same kind of issue occurring.
Oh, nice. And even R could be a species that was disappearing, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Tides were turned, which they are. Looks like it's happening. Cool. Okay, great point. Thank you so much. Anybody else? Lisa? Oh, Tyra. Well, let's Tyra go, because Lisa, let's have Tyra. Did you want to? And then Lisa, you can go.
I love the poem. It actually reminds me of my own birds too, because we don't like seeing birds captured in captivity in their own nature. So for me to see that, like their way of describing the beauty of their feathers, it just like makes the poem more bright and like a way to see how nature can be.
Oh, that's great. So his language really brought the images out clearly for you. That's wonderful. Yeah. Thank you. Lisa, did you have a comment?
Just real fast, without knowing the actual history behind this, that there were actual snakes, I took it as kind of a metaphysical snake where the colonialism or whatever was coming into perhaps exploit the land were the snakes. And
Oh, that's great. Yeah, that's a really great metaphor.
and so it works with both species and with language and culture.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Anybody else? Yes, Lily.
Off of what Tyra and Lisa said, I like how descriptive it was on the birds and like how they contributed to the land. It was really vivid, and the irony of it too, that the colonialism and taking something away from its land was beneficial in the wrong ways.
Thank you. Excellent. I'm glad you guys really like this poem. I do too, and the more that I read it, the more that I liked it. So let me see what time we have. Okay, because I want to have at least one more writing. I had a prompt. I think we'll look at another poem, and then we'll do a prompt, so you guys can have to write some more. I'd like to look at the letter to my great-great-grandchild. So if you all can get that one out. And
this was my favorite one, Elizabeth.
Oh, who said that? Oh, Charlotte. Okay, so letter to my great-great-grandchild. So it's an epistle, which is a letter poem, a dear blah blah poem. And so that's a really great technique to have, a form to use, especially if you are kind of stuck and you just want to write. You can just write a letter poem to someone or to something, and it can get you started, and it might stay a letter poem or it might change into something else. J.P. Grasser is a youngish man. I couldn't find it when he was born, but he looks like he's probably in his early 30s or late 20s. So I think that this poem, I'm just going to read it, and then we can talk about it. So, letter to my great-great-grandchild. And it's probably, I mean, I think about this, you know, pretty regularly, what it's going to be like for my children, if I have grandchildren, you know, what it will be like for them. So anyway, he imagined this, obviously, and I think it came out really interesting. Oh, Button, don't go thinking we love pianos more than elephants, air conditioning more than air. We loved honey, just loved it, and went into stores to smell the sweet perfume of unworn leather shoes. Did you know on the coast of Africa, the sea rose and carpenter bee used to depend on each other? The petals only opened for the middle sea. Their wings beat, so in the end, we protested with tuning forks. You must think we hated the stars, the empty ladles, because they conjured thirst. We didn't. We thanked them and called them lucky. We even bought the rights to name them for our sweethearts. Believe it or not, most people kept plants like pets and hired kids like you to water them whenever they went away. And ice, can you imagine? We put it in our coffee and dumped it out at traffic lights when it plugged up our drinking straws. I had a dog once, a real dog, who ate venison and golden yams from a plastic dish. He was stubborn, but I taught him to dance and play dead with a bucket full of chicken livers. And we danced too, you know, at weddings and wakes, in basements and churches, even when the war was on. Our cars were mostly named for animals, and sometimes we drove just to drive, to clear our heads of everything but wind. So I love the really subtle moments of this poem. I love the big love that comes through the poem, also like in James Wright's poem and Marie Howe's poem. It just, you know, a lot of real human love for, you know, our wild world comes through. And the letter, you know, he addresses it specifically to his great-great-grandchild, but it's, you know, it's to all of us. It's all to all children of the future, you know, specific and, you know, into the large picture. So does anybody have any comments on this poem that they feel want to point out? Yes, Deanna.
Yeah. I love this poem. It made me really sad to hear you read it. Because this week I've had a lot of sadness coming up over what's going on in the world. And it's so much about loss, and it's so much about what we love and has been lost, and remembering it and sort of conjuring it for the great-grandchild so that the great-grandchild can feel what it was like in this world at one time. I think it's an incredibly powerful and poignant poem, and especially for right now.
Yeah, clearly, you know, the ice, the wasting of the ice, that was really amazing to me, that surely there will be, you know, much more drought than we know now in you know, what is it, probably 2 or 3 generations. And so that, you know, I love that. I think his details are so interesting. The specifics, you know, that he's thought of, very original. I love that we loved honey, just loved it, and went into stores to smell the sweet perfume of unworn leather shoes. So he's taking something from the wild world, you know, leather from animals, and that we humans have changed them into shoes, and we love that smell as if it was a natural thing, and to us it is the smell of a new shoe or a new car, you know, in a sense. So, you know, all these really nuanced details, air conditioning more than air. I just, yeah, really, really interesting. Anybody else? Nancy?
I wanted to say something about the last line. You know, when I first heard it, and I actually didn't read, I read some of them, but not this one beforehand. So this was the first time for me. And when I first heard it, you know, it just brought tears to my eyes. And I know that feeling, especially right now, because I have often, I have often gone out in my car, you know, just to put the windows down and just to get the wind. And so, but as I sat with that last line, I thought, wow, it's so, I don't know if he intended this, but the thought that one's head could be cleared of everything but the wind while in a car, you know, that the setting of what we were actually in has become so background.
Yeah.
To our beings, you know, that we're just in our car because we're in our car all the time, and that we could be thinking, oh, the wind, and not be thinking, oh, the car and the metal and the gas and the engine, and you know.
Yeah, the irony of something so man-made and so destructive to the planet. I mean, the main reason we have, you know, such carbon buildup is from the cars, and yet we go into our cars to experience freedom.
Right.
You know, in a sense of being free in the wild world because of the wind. So, you know, how dumb is that? You know, right? It's great. It's great. And I love all these poems too, because they're filled with so much, you know, human warmth and love, you know, for the greater world. And including humanity as well. So let's see, one more comment, and then I want to give you guys a prompt. So Stephanie, and then I'm going to give you guys a prompt. We're going to write for 10 minutes, and we're going to come back and look at Sherwin Mitsui's poems. And that'll be probably as much time as we have. So Stephanie, what did you have to say?
I had just one thing to say that really caught my attention. First, because I'm a beekeeper and I love bees, but also when I was reading through this poem the first time, I just had this sense of inevitability, and that, you know, the poet was just explaining what happened to this child or whatever, but then, as if it were inevitable, but then when he's talking about 1, 2, 3, third and fourth stanzas, talking about the bee and the flower and how the flower would open at a certain note. And that would allow the bee to feed on the flower. But then what really got me was, in the end, we protested with tuning forks. And I thought, okay, so people were involved. It wasn't just, oh, well, that's the way it's going. It's like, ooh, that's the way it's going. Let's try and do something about it. Even on the end, it was ineffectual. But anyway, the tuning fork.
Thank you. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to give you guys a prompt, and I'd like you to write for 10 minutes. And I have actually 2 prompts, because this was one from, we have one from reading Craig Santos Perro's poem, and one from reading J.P. Grasser's poem. And one of the prompts, and just choose whatever you want to do. I'm going to time you for 10 minutes, and just write for 10 minutes. When I say go, and which is just going to be in a few seconds after I read you the prompt. So write for 10 minutes on something threatened in the non-human world, like Craig Santo Perez wrote about the kingfisher. So write for 10 minutes on something threatened in the non-human world, or you could combine the two. Write a letter to someone you love about what you might miss when it is gone. Okay, so write a letter to someone you love about what you might miss when it is gone, or you can combine the two. So go ahead and write for 10 minutes. Hoping we'd have more time, that more people will get a chance to read what they've written during these. I was hoping to have 3 writing sessions, but at least we got 2. And why don't we look at Sherwin Mitsui's poems, and then if there's time before we have to sign off, we can see if anybody would like to share what he or she just wrote. I just was thinking that in terms of writing poems, and what we've been discussing today, and the poems we've been looking at and thinking about terminology, that it's a good practice to tighten things up with definitions and theory, and then it's a really good practice to let it all unravel and see what happens. So don't hold, all that we've talked about in terms of theory and philosophy in the school of ecopoetics in its definitions too tightly. So now it's implanted, and you can think about it, and like I said, see what happens. So Sherwin Mitsui, we have 2 poems by him, and they're new poems that are not in his book, that were published recently in El Palacio, the museum magazine of New Mexico. Sherwin was born in 1975, so he's a relatively young man, and he is a Navajo, and he teaches regularly at the Institute of American Indian Arts. I believe he's living in Arizona now and teaching at Arizona State. So his poems are less narrative than the other poems that we've looked at. So less narrative and more abstract in their approach. So I'll read the first one. And actually, I think I'll read, I'll read the first one, and I'll just read them both, and we can talk about them both together, individually and together. So I think that's all that I want to say. Okay, so the first one is called Narrowing. We carry our to the furthest seam, wake with bleached eyes, thorn-punctured breath, sealed inside our outside voices. We exchange faces for ears of corn, duct-taped to the red tassels of November's fires. Our horned shadows against the dining room wall, our split tongues shivering under a blade's half smile. our middle name, one yellow leaf, unfurling our last. And the next one is called Bosky Moon. Night air, cupped and shook, bleed sighs when you dampen the mouth slit. Calendars assigned to others, winters break into hyphens. Under each new weather forecast, fragrant as noon pavement, on which you scrape your eyes to glimpse the crane's return. Look, the snowblind moon, clouds in lungs, shoulder blades sharpen against dry skin. It argues when marched away. So we have two poems by Sherwin that are very different from the other poems that we've looked at. Very lyric, and as I already said, abstract in their approach. There's you know, a narrative behind the lyric, but it's not a strong, really clear narrative like we saw in the other poems. It leaves more up to the reader's imagination in a lot of ways. And it might be, these poems might be a little bit more difficult in some aspects to figure out, and also in some ways to just go with them and the mystery and see what your experience is. So to me, these poems are, so, you know, the first one, what he's left out in that first line, we carry our, you know, I want to immediately fill in the blank, you know, as a human being. And, you know, for me, I don't want to say what I did. Did anybody have that experience of wanting to fill in the blank? Anybody else? Carol?
Yes, I wanted to fill in the blank.
Did you fill it? I guess I should have asked, what did you fill in the blank with?
I didn't.
Oh, okay. Did anybody fill in the blank? Nobody filled in the blank? Okay, I won't say what I filled in the blank with then. So, well, I filled in the blank with delusions, injustices. You know, we carry our delusions, we carry our injustices to the furthest scene, wake with bleached eyes, because that wake with bleached eyes gave me the clue of what was missing. Bleached eyes, like, you know, just not seeing. You know, we've destroyed our seeing by destroying the environment. We've destroyed, you know, how we see things. That's what I got from that. Thorn-punctured breath, sealed inside our outside voices. What do you think he means by outside voices? Jan, are you raising your hand?
Sure. I often think that that's a reference to our public speaking. What we say is not really what's inside. So the thorn-punctured breath is sealed inside our outside voices. So it's kind of a double meaning. I like poems like this because each stanza you can take and just work with. It can almost stand alone. I really love that thorn-punctured breath sealed inside our outside voices. It makes me think how true I could be to my own words rather than writing to please or writing to puzzle or writing to confound, but to really examine what it is that's in there that needs to come out. It's wonderful. Thank you.
Nice. Wonderful insights. I think I love that. The title of the poem is Narrowing. So, you know, I'm wondering, you know, what is narrowing? So I want to figure out what is narrowing that the poet's talking about. And so, you know, sealed inside our outside voices, outside meaning not the voice from our, you know, inner life or our soul, but a voice that is coming from our perceptions because of, you know, perhaps how we've narrowed our view of the world because of mistreating it perhaps. So I'm not sure, but that's what I'm wondering. Because Sherwin is known as an eco-poet. So I'm looking for this in his poem. He's making us work, you know, in this poem in some ways, and I really like that. Anybody else have any comments about the first poem by Sherwin Mitsui? Do you like is the abstract form too difficult or more difficult, or do you enjoy that? Are you able to just go with it and then see the impressions that it makes on you? Or do you find it, yes, Tyra?
These stronger, like harder, difficult poems for some reason, because it makes my mind think. Whereas the one I believe you were talking about was our outside voices, and we carry our blank. That just makes me more like motivated on like what I can understand with these harder poems, and it makes me like feel, I don't know, it just has like a weird feeling to it where I just get happy about it, and then when you guys are talking about it, it makes me feel like you guys understand what everything's going on.
Oh, well, no, we don't understand. We're all trying to figure it out. And I mean, I think people always think, oh, everybody else understands but me, but no, nobody. I mean, you know, I think we all have an experience like you just shared, which is beautiful. You're getting a feeling, you're getting the mystery from the poem, and it's inspiring you. And that inspiration is really exciting and joyful. And, you know, that's one of the things that poetry does. And it's great to have that experience. And sometimes when it's too clear, maybe it deadens that experience. So it's great that this poem has done that for you. So thank you for sharing that. I'm sorry, who just raised Lisa?
I had a hard time with it, but it helps kind of knowing the framework that he writes from. But the next one down, where we exchange faces for ears of corn, duct taped to the red tassels of November's fires. To me, that's kind of saying faces are our identity. And so we're trading our identity for sustenance in some way. And, or at least that is how I took that. There's something about selling their identity.
Yeah, I think that's really, sorry.
They're selling identity cheaply.
And I think one of the, and I like that, I really get, it's puzzling, that stanza, we exchange faces for ears of corn, duct taped to the red tassels of November's fires. The image is, it's like really strong, but it's like a synthetic image. So it's kind of, in a way, it's synthetic, and it's not authentic because it's not an image that we would see naturally. So it makes us try to understand and figure out why he's doing that. And that's one of the things that Sherwin Mitsui does so well, is he like synthesizes things from the world that have been synthesized by human beings. He juxtaposes them into the natural or the wild world. And so we have this dichotomy of these, these images that are like all searing, and then we have, they are mysterious and they're searing, and they arouse us, they jolt us, and that's a really cool thing. And then I for me, I want to figure it out. I want to figure out this poem, the puzzle of this poem. So thank you. So that was a really good insight. Where did you go? Oh, that Lisa just shared with us. Anybody else have any insights for the first poem? Gosh, we only have 5 minutes left. I can't believe this went so fast. Anybody have anything else to say about narrowing, or does anybody want to say anything about Bosky Moon? Again, I chose these poems. I tried to give a variety of different kinds in the whole packet, but then also having to narrow it down tonight to look at the poems. Just briefly, if you can look at these poems on your own, Joy Harjo was born in 1951. Her Speaking Tree, I think, is just a beautiful poem that speaks to the horrors and joys of humanity. It is an eco poem that goes into an eco justice poem, speaking of race, as well as Marilyn Chin's poem. She was born in 1955, and also Lucille Clifton's poem. Lucille Clifton is no longer alive. She was born in 1936. And so I wanted to look at those three poems together, but we're not going to have time. And then Mildred Varya, she was born in 1976 in Uganda. So she grew up in Africa, but she is living in the United States, and she's an amazing, interesting poet. And also Francisco Alarcon was born in 1954, and I think his poem Jaguars are really interesting. So please look at those on your own. I think this went really well. I think it went better than I thought it would in terms of how we could interact with each other and communicate without seeing each other and really making significant or specific eye contact, because I can't really see your eyes, like some of you, I guess, but behind the glasses. So, Charlotte, you're making it confusing. Did you want to say?
Sorry, no, I minimized the Zoom window and I can't figure out how to unminimize it. That's all. I keep forgetting that because I can see you. I forget that you can see me. I'm sorry about that.
But I'm so grateful that you guys all tried this out, and I hope that we can do it again, and we can continue with this theme, or I was thinking of doing a class on love poems and odes, and looking more at craft, because we didn't spend too much time looking at craft. And I'm really particularly grateful for our three teenagers who came tonight, Lily, Dorian, and Tyra. Thank you guys so much for coming. And we have just a couple more minutes, so if there's any final comments, please say what you would like. Anybody have anything else to say about any questions, any comments? Stephanie?
Yes, the one thing that I missed was a notation or citation of where these poems came from, which collection or whatever. So in the future, it would be really nice to be able to go.
I just collected them myself.
I know, but they had to come from somewhere.
You could. They just mostly, they come from my own files.
Yeah,
that
I know.
Keep files, and then if you just put the name of the poet and the title of the poem in the Google search, it will come up. So if you want more information, all of these poems are available online, and so some of them will have more information attached to them.
Yeah.
So thank you for asking that. That's a great resource. A couple of resources for poems that is free, and they're free. Poetry Foundation. So I think it's poetryfoundation.org. Just hundreds, thousands and thousands and thousands of poems, resources, all sorts of things. And also the Academy of American Poets website, poets.org. Both of those organizations send out free poems every day. So you can sign up on the Poetry Foundation website or on the poets.org website for a free email of course it's free, an email every day with a new poem. The Poetry Foundation recycles their poems that they've published, but the Academy of American Poets during the week publish new poems by contemporary poets. So that's always fun. And then the poets have a little synopsis, why I wrote this poem or what this poem is about. So that's a really good one. That's probably the best one to look at every day from the Academy of American Poets. I should include this next time on the packet so you guys can have that. Anything else? Yes, Julia.
I was just wondering if you would mind giving us the other prompt that you had, just so that we can do that on our own time.
Oh, sure. Let's see. I had a. Well, I had a whole document of prompts, but now I can't find it. I kind of combined the two. So one, I did have another one though for the letter, for the poem O by Claire Wamenholm. I had a prompt for that one, and so I thought that was a really beautiful poem. And it's interesting, that poem, we don't have time to read it, but it's like it's a prose poem, and except for the first three, the last three lines of the poem, or it switches at the end. So it's kind of like a nature poem. It's kind of like this beautiful lyric sound, you know, full of beautiful sounds that resonate, musical. And then all of a sudden, when you get to Oblivion, once there were oarfish, and then once the oxbows, and then the last three lines, that kind of switches to an eco poem, and it really you know, hits hard with the theme. So my prompt for that poem was pick a letter and write a nature poem. Start writing about nature with your letter, like she does, and then switch it and make it a subtle eco statement. So again, look at that poem, and then if you can break it up into most of it being sort of, you know, like a beautiful nature poem. So pick your own letter and start writing about nature, and then switch it and make it into a subtle eco statement. So just kind of copy that. Another prompt I had was taking the first line of, let's see, another poem. To take the Joy Harjo poem, Speaking Tree, and this was another prompt I had for you guys, to use the first line of her poem, some things on this earth are unspeakable, and then go with that yourself. So steal her first line and then write your own poem from that first line, but read her poem carefully first. So that was another prompt. So I'm glad to leave you. Thank you. Was it Stephanie that, yeah, no, not Stephanie, Julia. Thank you, Julia, for asking. I'm so happy to be able to share those with you guys. So I guess we have to say goodbye. I hope I see you all again. For those of you who live in Santa Fe, I teach regularly in the community, and I'll put you on my email list. And if you don't want to be on the email list, just let me know and I'll take you off. And I hope to see you guys again. So thank you so much, and thank you to Amara and to Julia of CCA for putting us all together tonight. So
Yeah,
bye.
thanks, Elizabeth. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Great.